Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel back to ancient Rome. Not to see the Colosseum or to walk the well-trodden stones of the Forum, but to a much more intimate space. A quiet room, lit by the gentle, flickering flame of an oil lamp. Here, we are going to explore the lengths you would have to go to in order to be considered beautiful. It's a world of chalky white skin, dramatic eyes, and ingredients that modern chemistry would flag as hazardous waste. And honestly, given the ingredient list for your new morning routine, you probably wouldn't survive it for very long. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I always love to see where you're all listening from, so feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air in your cubiculum is thick and still, heavy with the scent of olive oil from the lamp and the lingering perfume from last night's linen. A sliver of morning light forces its way through the wooden shutters, but it's not enough. You rely on the soft glow of the lamp beside your polished bronze mirror. It's time to prepare your face for a Roman woman of your status. This is not just a routine. It is a declaration. Your first and most important task is to achieve the perfect complexion. And in Rome, perfect means pale, a deathly, almost luminous white. This isn't about looking healthy and fresh. It's about looking wealthy. The mainstream historical fact of Roman life is that a tan, a sun-kissed glow, is the mark of a laborer. It means you toil in the fields, under the relentless Mediterranean sun. Your skin, however, must tell a different story. It must whisper of a life lived indoors, shielded from the elements. A life of leisure, poetry, and politics discussed from the comfort of a shaded portico. The ideal is called candor, a brilliant whiteness that is both admired and, frankly, completely unnatural. Your servant girl brings you a small, ornate pot. You dip your fingers in. The substance is cool and thick, a heavy paste. This is Cerussa Venetiana, or Venetian Cerusse, the most prized and expensive skin whitener available. You know it's made from lead shavings, steeped in vinegar until a white powder forms, which is then pressed into a cake. You don't think about the lead. You just think of the result. You begin to apply it to your face. It doesn't glide on like a modern foundation. It's dense and opaque, more like a layer of spackle. You pat and smooth it across your forehead, your cheeks, your chin, carefully working it into the skin. The feeling is strange, a heavy, suffocating mask that chills your skin as it sets. It has a faint, metallic smell that catches in the back of your throat. Your goal is to erase every blemish, every freckle, every hint of natural color. The paste settles into the fine lines around your eyes and mouth, and you know that later, when you smile, it will crack, creating a web of tiny fissures in your perfect white veneer. And here lies the cruel irony of your new favorite cosmetic. The lead that gives you this desirable pallor is also poisoning you, slowly. It's an irritant. Over time, it will ruin the very skin you're trying to perfect, causing blemishes, sores, and a grayish discoloration. And your solution to this will be to apply an even thicker layer of lead paste tomorrow. It's a vicious, toxic cycle, but beauty is pain, and in your world, status is everything. Of course, not everyone can afford the finest lead-based cosmetics. Others might use simple chalk powder, or even a paste made from wheat flour. These are safer, certainly, but they have their own problems. They're dusty, they flake off easily, and one ill-timed sneeze could send a puff of white powder into the air, making you look less like an aristocrat and more like you've had a mishap in the bakery. Not quite the dignified statement you were aiming for. Now that your face is a perfect, ghostly canvas, it's time for the details. The focal point. You don't reach for blush or bronzer. Color is for commoners. Instead, you reach for a different pot. This one contains a fine, black powder. It could be soot, carefully collected from a flickering lamp. It could be powdered antimony, another toxic heavy metal. Or, if you're feeling particularly rustic, it could be the charred end of a cork. You are going to give yourself a unibrow. Yes, you heard that right. That features so many of us in the modern world pluck, wax, and thread into oblivion was, for the Romans, a mark of supreme beauty. The unibrow, or cinephris, was seen as a sign of great intellect and deep passion. It was an alluring, almost smoldering look. The poet Ovid, a sort of ancient Roman beauty editor, even wrote about how a woman's eyebrows should be artfully managed, not plucked away, but enhanced to meet, or almost meet in the middle. So, you take a fine brush, or even just your fingertip, and you delicately trace a dark, soft line to connect your two brows. You have to be careful. Too thick, and it looks cartoonish. Too faint, and you lose the effect. You want it to look intentional, yet natural. An effortless sort of, I woke up with this gloriously intellectual brow look. And for those who truly wanted to commit to the look, here's a wonderfully quirky tidbit from the ancient cosmetic bag. Some texts suggest that women would use small patches of goat hair, adhered to the skin between their brows with tree resin. Imagine trying to keep that perfectly in place during a humid summer afternoon. One misplaced scratch of an itch, and your intellectual prowess could end up stuck to your cheek. It's a bold choice, certainly. And yet, there's a quiet debate that continues to this day among classicists and historians. Historians still argue whether the veneration of the unibrow was a genuine, widespread aesthetic or a more niche, poetic ideal exaggerated in surviving literature and art. Many of the sculpted marble portraits we see in museums feature two distinct eyebrows. So was the unibrow a true fashion trend, seen every day in the streets of Rome, or was it more like a high fashion runway look, admired in art and poetry, but rarely adopted by the average patrician woman? The evidence is tantalizingly ambiguous, leaving us to wonder just how many Roman women were truly sporting that singular, dramatic brow. You lean closer to the polished bronze of your mirror. The reflection that stares back is distorted, its colors muted, but the image is clear enough. A stark white face, smooth and emotionless as a statue, punctuated by that single, dark, serious brow. You don't see a person. You see a symbol, a walking, breathing testament to your family's wealth, your life of leisure, and your commitment to the ruthless standards of Roman beauty. You are pale, you are poised, and you are perfect, and you are slowly, gently, poisoning yourself to stay that way. Your ghostly white face and serious brow are complete, but the canvas still feels empty. Your eyes, now framed by this stark mask, need definition. You set down the pot of black powder for your eyebrows and pick up another, almost identical one. This is coal, an essential element not just for Roman women, but for men and children as well. A mainstream historical fact of the era is that coal's use in Rome was heavily influenced by the Egyptians, for whom it was both a cosmetic and a crucial form of protection against the sun's glare and eye infections. Or so they thought. The pot contains a dark, shimmering powder. It is galena, or lead sulfide, ground into a fine dust. You mix it with a little oil or fat to create a thick paste. Taking a slender rod made of bone, ivory, or wood, you dip it into the coal. You then close your eyes and draw the rod between your upper and lower lids, from the inner corner to the outer. The sensation is cool and smooth, but also slightly gritty. When you open your eyes, they are dramatically transformed. They are lined in a thick, dark rim of black, making them seem larger and more luminous against the deathly pallor of your skin. This isn't a subtle eyeliner flick. This is a heavy, commanding outline. It makes your gaze intense, almost hypnotic. You believe this lead-based liner has medicinal properties. You've been told it can improve your eyesight, ward off the evil eye, and even prevent common infections carried by flies. The irony, of course, is staggering. While the lead might have some mild antibacterial properties, it's primarily a neurotoxin. You are quite literally applying a slow-acting poison directly to your mucous membranes every single day. So while you're warding off a potential case of pink eye, you're trading it for the long-term risk of kidney failure, developmental issues, and brain damage. It's an interesting trade-off, but the dramatic, smoky eye is simply too alluring to pass up, a bit like choosing a truly fabulous pair of uncomfortable shoes, but with more permanent consequences. With your eyes defined, you now turn your attention to your hair. This is another area where Roman ideals are quite specific and quite damaging. The most fashionable colors are not the dark, glossy tones native to the Mediterranean. Instead, you covet the hair of the barbarians, the Celts, and the Germanic tribes. Blonde and red hair are considered exotic, youthful, and incredibly chic. To have golden locks is to carry a hint of the wild, untamed north, a subtle but clear signal of Rome's vast reach and power. It's a way of domesticating the conquered by wearing their features as a fashion accessory. Your own hair is a respectable, but ultimately boring, dark brown. It must be changed. There are several options available to you, none of them particularly pleasant. The most common method for achieving a blonde look is a caustic paste known as sapo, originally an import from Gaul. This was a soap made from goat fat, or tallow, and the ashes of a beechwood tree. You plaster this thick, smelly concoction all over your head, and then, for the best effect, you must sit in the bright sun. The combination of the alkaline paste and the sun's rays is supposed to bleach your hair to a desirable golden hue. The reality is that it's a harsh, unpredictable chemical process that will often leave your hair brittle, dry, and with a distinctively orange, rather than blonde, tint. Not to mention the feeling of having rancid goat fat baking on your scalp for several hours. The smell alone is enough to clear a room. But what if you wanted to go the other way? What if dark, jet black hair was your goal? For this, Roman cosmetology has prepared something truly special for you. This is our wonderfully quirky and slightly stomach-churning tidbit for tonight. Pliny the Elder, the great Roman naturalist and author, documented a popular recipe for black hair dye. First, you take a lead vessel. Into it, you pour some red wine. Then, you add a generous number of live leeches and leave the whole mixture to putrefy for 60 days. Yes, you read that correctly. 60 days of leeches slowly rotting in wine. The resulting black sludge is what you would then comb through your hair. One can only imagine the overpowering, metallic, coppery stench. Forget the slow poisoning of lead cosmetics. The scent of this hair treatment alone seems like a public health hazard. You'd have to hope your perfume budget was substantial. So you choose your poison. Perhaps you go for the caustic bleaching paste, sitting stoically in the garden while your servant fans you, hoping for blonde, but preparing for a brassy orange. As the paste hardens, your scalp begins to itch and burn, a sign that the magic is working. Or maybe today you feel like embracing the darkness and are brave enough for the leech wine. You carefully paint the foul-smelling goop onto your strands, trying not to breathe too deeply, the entire process feeling less like a beauty ritual and more like an unfortunate medical procedure. The methods were so varied, and the desire so great, that historians still argue whether the Roman fascination with blonde hair was purely an aesthetic choice, or if it carried deeper, complex undertones of appropriating the features of conquered peoples as a form of symbolic dominance. Was a Roman woman with bleached blonde hair just following a trend, like we might today? Or was she making a silent, political statement about the power and scope of the empire? Was it admiration, or a subtle form of appropriation and conquest? The answer likely lies somewhere in between, a complex mix of fashion, fetish, and political reality. You look back at your reflection in the bronze mirror, its surface now seeming a bit duller in the growing light of day. Your face is a white mask, broken only by your severe, connected brow and your heavy, kohl-rimmed eyes. Your hair is now a new color, still damp and stiff from its treatment. You pat it carefully, arranging the curls and waves into one of the elaborate, pinned-up styles favored by the empresses. The whole look is completely artificial. Nothing about the face looking back at you is truly yours. The color of your skin, the shape of your brows, the hue of your hair, all of it has been manufactured with a potent and dangerous cocktail of lead, ash, and maybe even decayed invertebrates. And you are not even finished. Your skin, though white, must now be smoothed of all its imperfections. And your smile, well, your smile needs its own, very special attention. With your face painted and your hair either bleached to a fragile straw-like texture or dyed a dubious shade of leech black, you can now address the subtler imperfections. Time, unfortunately, marches on even for the Roman elite, and with it come fine lines and wrinkles. And just as you attacked your complexion with lead, you will now fight the signs of aging with an equally strange and slightly alarming arsenal of creams and treatments. You reach for a small, elegant alabaster jar. This one doesn't have the metallic scent of your lead foundation. This smells rich, a little musky, a little wild. Inside is your anti-wrinkle cream, a thick, greasy pomade that you gently massage into the skin around your eyes and mouth, the places where your lead mask will later crack. What is this miracle cream made of? A popular and very luxurious option was a preparation of swan fat. Swans, with their elegant long necks and graceful appearance, were thought to possess some special, smoothing properties. Getting your hands on swan fat was, of course, a sign of considerable wealth. It's a very 1% kind of skincare ingredient. If swan fat was out of your budget, or perhaps you just had a bad encounter with a swan at some point, there were other options. One common base for these anti-wrinkle salves was essebum, the greasy, unwashed wool from a sheep. The lanolin-rich sweat was scraped off and combined with other ingredients. The smell would have been intense, a deeply pastoral, goaty aroma that no amount of added rose water could fully mask. Imagine smoothing that onto your face each morning. It's less of a spa day and more of a farm day. Another choice ingredient, championed by none other than the famously beautiful Empress Poppaea Sabina, wife of Nero, was ass's milk. She was said to travel with a herd of more than 500 jennets, or female donkeys, so that she could bathe in their milk daily to preserve her skin's youth and famous pallor. For you, a smaller pot of cream mixed with ass's milk and breadcrumbs will have to suffice. You work it into your skin, a sticky, doughy mixture that promises to soften and rejuvenate. After the cream has had a moment to absorb, or at least to sit on the surface of your skin, you might apply a face mask to deal with any spots or blemishes that the lead paste failed to conceal. And this is where we get into some truly fascinating territory. This is our quirky tidbit of the day. A favored mask for improving the complexion involved mixing crocodile dung, yes, the real thing, with a little donkey milk or water to form a paste. The logic, as far as we can reconstruct it, was that such an exotic and powerful creature must impart some of its vitality. You would have to lie very still with this substance drying on your face, contemplating the life choices that brought you to this moment, all while trying not to imagine the journey that your luxury cosmetic had taken to get to you. It puts a new perspective on the term mud mask. But your skin is not the only part of your appearance that needs preserving. Your smile is a powerful tool in the social arena of Rome, but maintaining it is a grim business. Dentistry, in the Roman world, was more of an extraction-based art form than a preventative one. A mainstream historical fact is that while Romans had access to rudimentary dental tools like forceps for pulling teeth, their understanding of what caused decay was limited. The wealthy Roman diet, surprisingly high in sugar from honey and fruits, and coarse grains that wore down enamel, meant that toothaches and missing teeth were incredibly common, even among the upper classes. So, how do you keep your breath fresh and your teeth looking their best? You certainly don't have a mint-flavored paste in a convenient tube. Instead, you reach for mouthwash. And the most popular, effective, and widely available mouthwash in the Roman Empire was urine. Specifically, stale urine imported in large clay amphorae from Portugal. The urine from what is now Portugal was considered the most potent and therefore the best. The ammonia in the urine acted as a powerful bleaching agent and disinfectant. So, your morning routine includes taking a swig of aged human urine, swishing it around your mouth vigorously, and spitting it out. The taste. Well, one imagines it's something you never quite get used to, but the pursuit of pearly whites demanded sacrifice. And after rinsing with urine, you might scrub your teeth with a powder. These tooth powders were made from various abrasives like crushed bone, horn, or powdered eggshells, sometimes mixed with myrrh to improve the taste. It was a harsh, gritty scrub that would have worn down your enamel almost as quickly as it whitened your teeth, leading to more sensitivity and decay down the line. It's a truly unfortunate feedback loop of dental despair. The use of urine as a cleanser wasn't just limited to mouths either. It was the key ingredient in Roman laundries, used to bleach togas to that brilliant, crisp white so prized by senators. This has led to one of the most interesting and still debated questions of Roman daily life. Historians still argue whether individuals collected their own urine for personal use, or if they purchased it from a communal, commercial source. The Emperor Vespasian famously placed a tax on the urine trade from public latrines, which is where we get the phrase, "Money doesn't stink, pecunia non olet." But was that commercial grade urine only for industrial processes like laundry? Or was it also what you were gargling with first thing in the morning? It's a slightly unsettling thought. Were you using your own or someone else's? We just don't know for sure. You rinse your mouth and give your teeth a final check in the bronze mirror. They are, you hope, a little whiter. Your skin feels tight and slightly greasy from the swan fat cream. The scent of sheep's wool, decaying leeches, lead, and aged urine mingles in the air around you, creating a uniquely Roman perfume of beauty. It is the smell of effort, the smell of status. You've whitened your skin, defined your brows, lined your eyes, dyed your hair, smoothed your wrinkles, and bleached your teeth. Now, you must address the rest of your body and the aromas that were meant to cover up the smell of all these unfortunate ingredients. Now that your face is a carefully constructed masterpiece of pale, unibrowed perfection, it's time to consider the rest of you. The Roman world was not a sterile place. The smells of the city, wood smoke, cooking food, open sewers, and thousands of closely packed bodies were ever present. Consequently, a core component of presenting yourself as a member of the upper class was to smell, quite deliberately, of something else entirely. Something expensive, something exotic, Perfume or unguentum was not a luxury for a special occasion. It was an absolute necessity of daily life. You moved from the small pots of color and cream to a collection of delicate glass vials and alabaster flasks. These contain the precious scented oils that will be your final layer. The most sought-after perfumes came from the farthest reaches of the empire and beyond, their rarity adding to their allure. You might unstopper a vial of nard, an intensely aromatic oil derived from a plant that grew high in the Himalayas. Its journey to your dressing table was a long and treacherous one, passing through the hands of countless merchants along the Silk Road, making it phenomenally expensive. To wear it was to wear a story of global trade on your skin. Another favorite was frankincense. It's sweet, woody resin harvested from trees in Arabia and Somalia. Or perhaps myrrh, with its warm, bitter scent. Rose oil, from Damascus or Egypt, was also incredibly popular, requiring a vast quantity of petals to produce even a small amount. The Romans did not dab perfume discreetly on their wrists. They anointed themselves with it. You would pour the scented oil into your palm and smooth it over your arms, your neck, your shoulders, and even into your newly dyed and treated hair. Men and women alike use these heavy scents. At a dinner party, the host might have perfumed water sprinkled on the guests between courses, and some of the truly extravagant would even have scented doves released to flutter around the room, showering the space with fragrant droplets from their wings. The obsession with scent leads us to a fascinating and quite logical mainstream historical fact: the Roman bathhouse. The thermae were central to Roman social life, and they weren't just for getting clean. They were complex establishments with hot rooms, cold rooms, steam rooms, gymnasiums, and libraries. But a key part of the bathing ritual was the use of the strigil. After exercising and sweating, a Roman would be slathered in oil. Then, a servant or the bather themselves would use a curved metal scraper, the strigil, to scrape off the mixture of oil, sweat, and dirt. This process was the Roman equivalent of using soap. Once scraped clean, they would rinse off and then proceed to the anointing stage, slathering themselves in those expensive perfumes. You emerge from the bathhouse not just clean, but gleaming and radiating an aura of expensive, imported fragrance. With your skin scented and glowing, there is one last, and rather painful, step in perfecting your body: hair removal. Just as the Romans had specific ideals about the hair on your head, they had very strong feelings about hair on your body. And for a woman of status, the ideal amount of body hair was none at all. Smooth skin, from head to toe, was considered a sign of youth, purity, and refinement. Pubic hair in particular was seen as unsightly and something to be removed completely. Ovid, our ancient beauty guide, wrote rather explicitly that a woman should ensure her legs were not rough with bristling hair. So how did you achieve this flawlessly smooth canvas? The options were universally unpleasant. The most straightforward method was plucking. A servant would be tasked with using a set of tweezers, known as valselli, to pull out each offending hair one by one. This would be a time-consuming, and one imagines, incredibly tedious and painful process, especially over large areas like the legs. Another option was a type of early depilatory cream called philotrum or dropax. These were thick pastes, often made with a worrying mix of ingredients like animal-based fats, resins, and sometimes caustic substances like quicklime. You would smear it on, wait for it to hopefully dissolve the hair, and then scrape it off. This could often result in chemical burns, rashes, and intense irritation, a high price to pay for smoothness. And that brings us to our quirky tidbit for this section: a specialized form of hair removal that took place right in the public baths. In many of the larger bathhouses, there were specific attendants whose sole job was hair plucking. These ellipti were known for their distinctive, high-pitched cries as they advertised their services throughout the bath complex. The philosopher Seneca, who lived in an apartment directly above a bathhouse, famously complained about the noise in a letter. He described the armpit hair plucker with his insistent, shrill voice that only went quiet when he was actually making his clients yelp in pain. Imagine trying to have a quiet read of some Stoic philosophy while being constantly interrupted by the shrieks of men having their underarms plucked downstairs. It's a uniquely Roman kind of urban disturbance. You might choose to undergo this torture at the baths, or perhaps in the relative privacy of your own home. Either way, it's an ordeal. Your servant sets to work with the tweezers, or perhaps a piece of pumice stone, another common tool used to sand down stubble and exfoliate the skin simultaneously. The feeling is raw and abrasive. This whole process raises a delicate but important question, over which historians still argue whether the Roman ideal of female hairlessness was uniformly applied or if it varied by social class and context. While elite poetry and art often depict perfectly smooth female bodies, we have evidence from medical texts and everyday artifacts that suggest some women did not, or could not, adhere to this standard. Was it an absolute rule for the upper echelons, but less important for a working woman? Or was it more of a personal preference? Like many beauty standards today, the surviving sources don't give us a clear, universal answer. You now stand, finally, almost ready to face the day. Your skin is scented with the treasures of the East. Your body is smooth, though likely a bit sore, and red from the aggressive hair removal. Every aspect of your appearance has been managed, manipulated, and molded to fit the specific, and often contradictory, standards of Roman beauty. You must be pale, but have eyes lined with the darkest black. You must have the fierce, intellectual unibrow, but also the youthful, hairless body of a girl. You must look completely effortless while spending hours undergoing painful and poisonous treatments. It is a performance, and the curtain is about to rise. All that's left is to consider the combined, long-term effects of this routine, and the powerful lie at the heart of it all. You stand before the bronze mirror for a final inspection. The person looking back at you is a triumphant Roman ideal. Her skin is as pale and luminous as moonlight on marble, a testament to a life lived out of the sun. Her eyebrows meet in a single, serious line, hinting at a deep and thoughtful nature. Her eyes are large and captivating, framed in dramatic, smoky kohl. Her hair, once a mundane brown, is now a shade of barbarian blonde, painstakingly arranged in a complex sculpture of braids and curls that telegraphs both her fashion sense and her husband's wealth. Her body, beneath her fine linen tunic, is smooth and fragrant with the perfumes of Arabia. She is beautiful. She is powerful. She is also a walking toxic event. Let's take a moment to tally the cumulative damage of this daily ritual. Your morning began by slathering your face in lead carbonate. Over the years, this will not only ruin your skin, causing chronic sores and gray discoloration, but the lead will also be absorbed into your bloodstream. This slow, steady poisoning can lead to fatigue, anemia, nerve damage, and cognitive decline. Then, you lined your eyes with lead sulfide, applying a potent neurotoxin directly to a mucous membrane, compounding the dose. If you chose to dye your hair black, you may have used a concoction of rotted leeches in a lead bowl, adding yet another vector for poison. Even the pursuit of a fashionable blonde wasn't safe, with caustic paste that could cause chemical burns on your scalp and leave your hair permanently damaged. Your dental routine, involving a swish of stale, ammonia-rich urine followed by scrubbing with an abrasive powder like crushed bone, would have been a disaster for your oral health. While it might have temporarily whitened your teeth, it also systematically stripped away your protective enamel, leading to extreme sensitivity, rampant cavities, and eventual tooth loss. The very tools meant to preserve your smile would, in the end, destroy it. This leads to the stark and very real mainstream historical fact that dentures were a reality for many Romans. Prosthetics were crafted from materials like bone, ivory, and even human teeth scavenged from slaves or the dead, all held together with gold wiring. So your perfect, white smile might have literally belonged to someone else. The pain did not end there. The daily or weekly ordeal of plucking, scraping, or sanding away every hair on your body would leave your skin perpetually irritated, red, and prone to ingrown hairs and infections in a world without modern antibiotics. You would be in a constant state of low-grade physical discomfort for the sake of an aesthetic ideal. Looking good, in Rome, meant feeling pretty bad most of the time. And this brings us to perhaps the most curious, quirky part of Roman beauty culture: the almost complete denial of the effort involved. Despite the hours of work, the painful procedures, and the small army of servants required to create this look, the ideal was to appear naturally and effortlessly beautiful. Ovid, the poet who gave such detailed advice on cosmetics, also advised women to be discreet about their use. He famously wrote, "Let your lover not find on your dressing table a box of cosmetics. Art pleases when its effects are felt, but the art itself is concealed." He suggested that all these treatments, the leech hair dye, the face masks, the skin whitening pastes, should be done in absolute secrecy, in the early hours of the morning before anyone else was awake. The end result was meant to look like you just woke up this way. It's the ancient Roman version of the no makeup look, except the makeup is a cocktail of poisons and the no is a carefully constructed social fiction. This manufactured naturalness was the ultimate status symbol. The ability to look so pale and perfect, as if you've never seen a day of sun or labor in your life, was the entire point. Your face wasn't just a face. It was a billboard advertising your family station. This has fueled a long-running discussion among scholars. Historians still argue whether the extreme artificiality of Roman beauty standards was a form of female empowerment or female oppression. On one hand, you could see it as a domain where women, largely excluded from public and political life, could exert control, showcase their status, and compete in a socially acceptable arena. The elaborate hairstyles and flawless makeup were their uniform, their armor. On the other hand, the argument is strong that these painful, dangerous, and time-consuming rituals were a cage. They shackled women to impossible standards, damaged their health, and reinforced the idea that their primary value was in their decorative, idealized appearance. The answer, as is so often the case in history, is probably a complicated mix of both. So as you turn away from the mirror, your routine complete, you are ready to step out into the world. You are a masterpiece of illusion, an elegant lie told with lead, urine, swan fat, and imported flowers. You drift through the forum, your pale face a stark contrast to the sun-beaten stone, and you project an aura of effortless grace. But beneath the perfumed oil, your skin is sore. Beneath the white lead, a network of sores might be forming. Your beautiful hair is brittle, and your gleaming smile is maintained by methods that would make a modern dentist weep. You would be admired. You would be envied. You would be a symbol of Roman civilization at its most refined. But the truth is, the very standards of beauty that made you a living work of art were also, slowly and surely, ruining you from the inside out. It's a sobering thought, as we drift off to sleep in our modern world, with our scientifically tested serums and our non-toxic foundations. We still chase beauty, but at least our anti-wrinkle cream doesn't come with a side of crocodile dung. The bloodiest chariot race in Roman history. Settle in now. Let the sounds of your world fade into a gentle hum and allow your mind to drift. Drift back through the centuries, past empires and ages, until you find yourself floating down into a soft, Mediterranean morning. The air that greets you is mild, carrying the scent of sea salt, baking bread, and 1,000 years of history. You are in Constantinople. The year is 532 AD. This isn't the Rome you might picture from movies. All marble and togas and legionaries marching in perfect formation. This is the other Rome, the Eastern Rome, a city that sees itself as the true inheritor of that ancient legacy. It is a glittering metropolis, the largest and wealthiest in the entire world, perched perfectly between Europe and Asia. Below you, the waters of the Golden Horn Inlet are deep, shimmering blue, dotted with fishing boats and heavy trading vessels that have arrived from as far away as Persia and Ethiopia. You are not here for trade, however. You are here for the races. Making your way through the city is a journey in itself. The streets are a labyrinth of stone and commerce. You pass by vendors selling everything from silk slippers to jeweled daggers. The air is thick with the competing aromas of roasting chestnuts. And is that fermented fish sauce on a bun? Let's hope that's not today's primary snack option. The chatter around you is a living symphony, a blend of lilting Greek and stately Latin, the two languages of this sprawling empire. People from every corner of the known world brush past you. A stern-faced Goth with a braided beard, a slender Egyptian merchant in fine linen, a family from Syria chattering excitedly. You step aside to let a bureaucrat, nose high in the air, sweep by in his expensive robes. To get a good seat at the day's main event, you didn't use an app. You probably just knew a guy who knew another guy who owed your uncle a favor involving a suspiciously affordable amphora of wine. And then you see it, rising above the sea of houses and markets like a man-made mountain range, a colossal structure of brick and stone that dominates the city's skyline. This is the Hippodrome. It is the heart of Constantinople, its grand stage, its communal living room, and its political pressure valve, all in one. As you enter through one of its many arched gateways, the sheer scale is what strikes you first. It is a vast, elongated U-shape, capable of holding a staggering 100,000 people. Imagine the largest modern sports stadium you can, then fill it with a populace that considers chariot racing less a sport and more a fundamental expression of their identity. The tiered stone seating banks rise up and up, already beginning to fill with a colorful river of citizens. Down below, on the sandy track, is the spine of the stadium, the central barrier they call the spina. It is not just a dividing wall. It is a museum of imperial vanity and plundered glory. There stands an Egyptian obelisk, carved thousands of years before Christ and transported here at enormous expense. Near it is the serpent column, a strange and wonderful trophy cast from the bronze shields of defeated Persian soldiers after the Battle of Plataea, almost 1,000 years ago. It's a strange monument for a Christian city, a relic of a pagan Greek victory. But here it stands, a testament to the city's long and layered memory. But the crowd is not looking at the monuments today. They are organizing themselves. They are settling into their designated sections. And as they do, the stadium divides itself into two dominant colors, blue and green. These are the racing factions, the blues, or Veneti, and the greens, or Prasini. And to understand the story of this day, you must first understand them. They are so much more than sports teams. Imagine if a political party, a social club, and a megachurch were all rolled into one, and then given their own sports franchise. That begins to approach the reality of the blues and the greens. Their rivalry is woven into the very fabric of life in Constantinople. It divides families, dictates friendships, and can even influence your career path. The Blues are traditionally the faction of the establishment. The wealthy aristocrats, the major landowners, the senators, they tend to cheer for the Blue Charioteers. Theologically, they align with the Orthodox Christian faith, the one favored by the man watching from his imperial box today, the Emperor Justinian. The Greens, on the other hand, are the People's Party. They are the faction of the artisans, the shopkeepers, the dockworkers. Their spiritual leanings often drifted toward the Monophysite interpretation of Christianity, a doctrine considered heretical by the powers that be. So when the Greens cheer, they are cheering for more than just a charioteer in a green tunic. They are cheering for themselves, for the common man against the powerful. The fanaticism is absolute. Devotees compose elaborate curses against rival drivers, scribbling them onto lead tablets and burying them near the stables or under the track, hoping to magically lame a horse or break a chariot's axle. Some fans even name their horses and children after famous charioteers. They make modern sports hooligans look like a gentle boat club, but with more draped fabrics and a slightly better grasp of classical architecture. Historians still argue whether the Blues and Greens began as simple sporting clubs that gained political weight, or if they were, from their inception, an evolution of old Roman civil militias designed to keep order. Whatever their origin, by this date in 532, they have become two opposing forces simmering with religious and class resentments, waiting for a spark. And high above the track, looking down on this sea of humanity, is the spark plug himself. In a grand, gilded chamber called the Kathisma, the imperial box with its own private, guarded entrance from the great palace, sits Emperor Justinian. He is a man of boundless ambition and restless energy. He was not born to the purple. He was the nephew of the previous emperor, a pig farmer turned soldier named Justin. Justinian is a complicated figure, a legal reformer, a devout Christian, a tireless administrator who dreams of restoring the Roman Empire to its former glory. But he is also seen as arrogant, and his aggressive new taxes have made him deeply unpopular with just about everyone. He is not cheering for the Blues or the Greens today. He is here because he has to be. The emperor's presence at the games is a tradition, a necessary performance of power and public engagement. For the people, the hippodrome is the one place they can voice their opinions directly to their ruler. They can acclaim him, or they can jeer him. It is a dialogue of roars. For now, the morning is calm. The first few races, perhaps featuring younger, less famous drivers, are underway. Chariots pulled by 4 frantic horses thunder down the track, a cloud of dust and sand trailing behind them. The crowd roars, but it is a comfortable, familiar sound. It is the happy noise of a public holiday. The sun climbs higher in the sky, warming the stone seats. You lean back, lulled by the rhythmic sound of the horses' hooves on the packed earth and the steady murmur of the immense crowd. Everything feels normal. Everything feels safe. But in the air, there is a brittle tension, an unspoken agreement that the real drama has yet to begin. The Blues and the Greens are both nursing a shared grudge, a grievance not against each other, but against the man in the golden box. And they are about to find their voice. The sun, now higher in the sky, has chased the last of the cool morning shadows from the stands. You can feel the warmth of the stone through your clothes. Down on the track, the main event is being prepared. Servants in simple tunics rake the sand, smoothing over the ruts left by the earlier, lesser races. The air crackles with a new level of anticipation. This is the race that matters. This is for all the glory. You watch as the charioteers themselves emerge, not from a common tunnel, but like demigods from their respective stables. They are the superstars of their age, The most famous of them, men like Porphyrius, were figures of immense celebrity. Their statues are erected in public squares. They earned vast fortunes. A single successful charioteer could accumulate more wealth than 100 senators combined. There's a story of a driver from centuries before, a man named Diocles from Lusitania, who raced for 24 years and won a sum equivalent to well over $1 billion in today's money. It's a respectable career choice, provided you can accept the very high probability of being trampled to death by your own horses. The drivers wear their colors with pride. A green champion checks the bindings on his 4-horse chariot, the quadriga, while a blue competitor adjusts the leather straps that wind tightly around his torso. These straps are his only safety feature, meant to keep him anchored to the light, almost flimsy-looking wooden chariot. Tucked into his belt is a sharp, curved knife. It's not for defense against his rivals. It's a tool of last resort, to cut himself free from the reins if, or when, the chariot smashes apart against the spina or the wheel of a competitor. But today, the usual boisterous rivalry between the blue and green supporters feels different. It is muted. As the teams prepare, you begin to hear isolated shouts directed not at the opposing team, but towards the imperial box. They are complaints, petitions shouted across the vast space, swallowed for now by the general hum. The reason for this shared discontent is recent, and it is raw. A few days earlier, there had been a riot. Nothing new in Constantinople, but this one ended with arrests for murder. As it happened, the condemned men included members of both the Blues and the Greens. In a rare show of factional unity, they had pleaded with Emperor Justinian for mercy. All he had to do was grant a pardon, a simple act of imperial clemency to calm the city. He had refused. Well, partially, he commuted the sentences from death to imprisonment. But to the mob, this was an insult, not a compromise. It was the act of a ruler who didn't listen. It felt like bad customer service from the only company in town. So now, the Blues and the Greens have a common enemy, the stubborn, tax-loving man in the gilded cathizma. A trumpet blast, high and clear, cuts through the noise. It is time. The 4-horse chariots clatter and jostle into their starting gates, the Corsairs. The horses are magnificent animals, bred for speed and aggression. Their breath mists in the air. They paw at the dirt, their eyes wide and wild. The drivers murmur to them, trying to keep them calm. An official, the editor, stands in a high tribunal. He raises a white cloth, the mappa. For a moment, the entire stadium holds its breath. 100,000 people fall into a profound silence. The only sound is the jingling of harnesses and the nervous snorting of the horses. He drops the cloth. The gates spring open with a crash, and the chariots surge forward. The sound is instantaneous and overwhelming, a thunder of hooves, the rumble of 16 wheels, and the roar of 100,000 voices unleashed at once. They pour onto the track in a frantic, desperate scramble for the inside lane as they approach the first turn. This is the most dangerous moment. A tangled rein or a broken axle here means certain disaster. For the first lap, the race consumes all attention. A green chariot takes an early lead, and his section of the stadium erupts. The driver hunches low, his knuckles white as he grips the reins, the wind whipping his tunic. A blue challenger follows close behind, waiting for an opening, his horses running as a single, fluid machine. The spectacle is magnificent, a blur of color and speed and controlled chaos. They whip past the serpent column, their wheels churning up a spray of sand. But as they round the far turn to begin the second lap, you notice a change in the crowd's roar. The cheers are becoming less about the race and more rhythmic. Disjointed chants of blue and green are starting to falter, replaced by a low, pulsing sound. It starts in the green section, but then, unnervingly, the blue section picks it up. Nika, Nika. At first, it's just a pocket of noise, but it spreads. It moves along the stone tiers like a fire, from one block of seats to the next. The chant is simple, just 2 syllables. Nika. It means conquer or victory. It is the traditional cry of encouragement for a charioteer. Conquer, blue driver, or victory, green horses. But that's not what's happening now. The word has been stripped of its allegiance. It is no longer aimed at the track. You feel a strange tremor run through the stands, a vibration that has little to do with the race. You look up at the Imperial box. Justinian is still there, flanked by his guards. He has not moved. He watches the track, or pretends to, his face a mask of imperial indifference. His lack of reaction is gasoline on the fire. Nika, Nika, Nika. Now it is a single voice, 100,000 throats chanting in perfect, menacing unison. The race is still happening. The horses are thundering through their 3rd and 4th laps, but no one is watching anymore. The charioteers may as well be ghosts. The entire collective will of the city has turned, like a great beast, to face one man. The drivers on the track must feel it. This sudden terrifying drop in interest. A chilling realization that they have become irrelevant to the roaring mob. It's like being the opening act for a natural disaster. The sound is a physical force. It presses in on you. It hammers against the walls of the hippodrome. It is a demand, a threat. Historians still argue whether this was a truly spontaneous outpouring of public fury or a cleverly orchestrated piece of political theater, instigated by disgruntled senators who saw an opportunity to use the mob to depose an emperor they hated. The truth is likely somewhere in between. A spontaneous fire, perhaps, but one that certain powerful people were happy to fan. The chant grows louder, more insistent. You see men standing on the stone benches, their faces red, their fists punching the air. They are all looking at the kathisma. They are no longer blues and greens. They are simply the people, and they have found their voice. It is the voice of an ultimatum. Conquer. It is no longer a cheer. It is a command directed at the powers that be. And it is not at all clear what they are being commanded to conquer, or who is supposed to do the conquering. The Emperor Justinian sits like a statue, refusing to acknowledge the roar. Beside him, his most trusted general, Belisarius, puts a hand on the hilt of his sword. The race, forgotten, finishes with a whimper, but the roaring does not stop. It has become something else entirely. It is the sound of an ancient contract breaking, the sound of a city on the edge of the abyss. The sun has passed its zenith, and the light slanting into the hippodrome takes on a harsher, more confrontational quality. The air, which had been full of festive energy, is now thick with menace. The Nika chant has subsided from a constant roar to a sullen, rhythmic pulse, an angry heartbeat for the city itself. The last of the charioteers have long since guided their sweating, nervous horses off the track, leaving the great arena empty. But the crowd has not moved. They remain in their seats, a vast, simmering kettle of humanity waiting to boil over. Their initial demands were for the release of the condemned prisoners. But with every moment that Justinian stonewalls them from his high perch in the kathisma, their ambitions grow. The shouts from the stands are no longer just for mercy. They are now laced with insults, hurled directly at the emperor. They mock his humble origins, calling him a Thracian peasant playing at being a Roman. They jeer at his wife, Theodora, dredging up rumors of her scandalous past as an actress and courtesan. They even critique his fiscal policy, which, in the grand scheme of insults, shows a remarkable level of civic engagement. One man's heckle is another man's fiscal review. You see a change in the imperial box. Justinian, who had maintained a facade of granite stillness, finally stirs. He stands. This is the moment. He could address the crowd, offer a concession, a promise, anything to break the feverish tension. Instead, he and his entourage turn, and with a sweep of imperial purple, they disappear through the private passage connecting the Kathisma to the sprawling complex of the great palace next door. His departure is the worst possible move. It is not seen as a strategic retreat. It is seen as an act of supreme contempt. He isn't just ignoring them. He's ghosting 100,000 of his own citizens. A new sound rises from the crowd, a deep, guttural cry of fury. This is the point of no return. The dam of civil order has broken. People begin to pour from the stands, not through the exits, but down onto the track itself. The sacred ground of the charioteers is swarmed by a furious mob. They are no longer a crowd of spectators. They have become an army. You see men ripping at decorative stonework, looking for anything that could be used as a weapon. They find their way into the stables, not to admire the horses, but to find pitchforks and tools. A group of men, using their combined strength, manages to pry one of the smaller bronze statues from its plinth on the spina. The ancient trophy is now just a bludgeon. From the hippodrome, the riot spills out into the city like a river bursting its banks. The mob, united in their hatred for the emperor, splits into marauding bands. Their first target is the Praetorium, the city's main government office, which holds the official tax records and legal archives. They storm the building, and soon, a thin wisp of smoke becomes a thick, greasy column. The fire is not just an act of destruction, it's an act of erasure. They are burning their debts. They are burning the legal machinery they feel has been turned against them. The sky, once a brilliant Mediterranean blue, begins to haze over with smoke. The scent of salt and bread is replaced by the acrid smell of burning cedar, melting bronze, and civic rage. The fires spread, leaping from the Praetorium to nearby public buildings. Shouts and screams echo through the narrow streets. You watch as a group tears down an image of the emperor, stomping it into the dusty ground. The riot has found a new slogan, shouted by the Green faction leaders. Long live Hypatius, the emperor of the Romans. Who is Hypatius? He is a senator, and more importantly, he is the nephew of a former emperor, Anastasius. This gives him a whisper of legitimacy, a claim, however flimsy, to the throne. It is entirely possible that Hypatius has no desire whatsoever to be emperor, especially an emperor crowned by a raging mob. He is, by most accounts, a perfectly content member of the aristocracy who was probably just hoping for a quiet afternoon at the races. One moment you're enjoying the spectacle, the next you're the designated survivor in a city-wide meltdown. It's a bad day at the office. While Constantinople burns, inside the cool marble halls of the great palace, there is panic. Justinian is surrounded by his advisors, generals, and a terrified flock of senators who have remained loyal. Reports pour in, each one worse than the last. The fires are out of control. The city guard has been overwhelmed, with many deserting to join the rioters. The mob has found its candidate. Hypatius and his brother, Pompeius, have been located and are being carried on the shoulders of the crowd, back toward the hippodrome to be crowned. Historians still argue whether Hypatius was a reluctant puppet, literally dragged from his home by the mob, or if he was a more cunning political player, feigning unwillingness while secretly orchestrating the coup with his fellow senators. His pleas of loyalty to Justinian just hours earlier now look very suspicious indeed. The palace, once the unshakable center of the world, feels like a ship in a hurricane. Justinian, the man of iron will and boundless ambition, seems to crumble. His dream of a renewed Rome is turning to ash just outside his window. His advisors urge him to flee. A ship is waiting in the palace harbor, stocked and ready. They can escape across the Sea of Marmara, regroup their forces in the provinces, and live to fight another day. It is the sensible option, the logical choice, and Justinian, the great restorer, agrees. He gives the order to prepare his personal treasury for evacuation. The gold, the jewels, the imperial regalia, all of it is to be loaded onto the ship. It is a moment of total defeat. The emperor is about to abandon his capital to a mob and a hastily appointed usurper. He is trading his crown for his life. The senators in the room nod grimly. His top generals, Belisarius and Mundus, loyal but pragmatic, prepare to escort their emperor into exile. The new Rome, this glittering Constantinople, is about to fall. The smoke-choked city seems to have won. High in the sky, an eagle might see a vast crown of smoke and fire sitting atop the city. The people have given Constantinople a new crown, and Justinian a new destiny, to be a fugitive. The air in the imperial council chamber is thick and heavy, smelling of fear and sweat, with the faint, acrid tang of the burning city seeping through the high palace walls. The decision has been made. Justinian, the emperor of the Romans, the man who dreamed of reconquering Italy and Africa, is packing his bags. His generals, Belisarius and Mundus, stand ready, their faces grim. The loyalist senators shuffle their feet, their eyes darting towards the exits, already imagining their own fates under a new regime. The story of Justinian's reign is about to end, not with a bang, but with the quiet sound of a back door closing. And then, a woman speaks. She is Empress Theodora. Until this moment, she has been a silent observer. She is a woman whose presence in this room is, in itself, a small miracle. She wasn't born into aristocracy. Far from it. Her father was a bear keeper for the Green faction at the Hippodrome. She herself was an actress on the Constantinopolitan stage, a profession that, in the 6th century, was synonymous with the world's oldest. Her past was a source of endless scandal and vicious gossip. But Justinian had seen something in her, a brilliant mind and a spine of steel. He fell deeply in love, changed the laws that forbade a senator from marrying an actress, and made her not just his wife, but his co-ruler, his empress. And now, as the most powerful men in the world are about to flee, she rises. Her voice cuts through the murmuring panic. She is not shouting. Her tone is measured, cold, and utterly contemptuous of the cowardice filling the room. She looks directly at her husband. She reminds him that they have a ship, and the sea is open. His life is not in immediate danger. He can escape with his riches. But, she asks him, once he has run away, would he ever prefer that life of a wealthy exile over a noble death? Would he trade his empire for a few more years of breathing, always looking over his shoulder? Then, she delivers a line that will echo through history. As for me, she says, I hold with the old proverb, that purple makes a fine winding sheet. The purple she speaks of is porphyry, the deep purple color reserved exclusively for the emperor. To be born in the purple was to be born to rule. What she is saying is that the imperial purple is the only burial shroud she will accept. She would rather die an empress in her palace than live as a common refugee. A profound silence falls over the room. Theodora's words are a slap in the face to every man planning to run. It's one of history's great hold my beer moments, delivered with imperial gravitas. She has single-handedly shamed them all back into their duties. A bit of a quirky tidbit from the primary source, the historian Procopius, is his comment that Theodora was unusually pale as she spoke. He suggests she was terrified, but her will was stronger than her fear. Her performance, and perhaps all her years on the stage prepared her for this one, changes the course of history. Justinian, galvanized by his wife's resolve, looks at his generals. The plan for evacuation is scrapped. A new plan is drawn. It is not a plan of defense. It is a plan of attack. He turns to his two greatest military assets, Belisarius and Mundus. Belisarius, arguably one of the most brilliant generals in all of Roman history, commands the emperor's personal bodyguard, the elite imperial guard. Mundus commands a force of hardened barbarian mercenaries, mostly Herulian Goths, who are quartered in the city. These are professional soldiers. They have no stake in the politics of the blues and greens. They are loyal to one thing only, the man who pays them. While Theodora's speech has been rallying the palace, the situation at the Hippodrome has reached its climax. The mob has succeeded in its goal. Hypatius, the reluctant or cunning senator, has been brought to the now trashed arena. They have no crown, of course. Justinian is still wearing it. So in a moment of revolutionary improvisation, they place a gold necklace from Hypatius's own wife onto his head. It's a bit of a downgrade from the real thing, more of a world's best usurper party favor, but it does the job. He is seated on the imperial throne in the Kathisma, the very box Justinian had fled just hours before. The roar of the crowd is triumphant. They have their new emperor. They have won. This is the moment Belisarius chooses to strike. He gathers his guards. They are heavily armed and armored, a stark contrast to the ragtag mob. They move with lethal efficiency through the smoky, deserted streets toward the Hippodrome. They approach the main imperial entrance, the one leading to the Kathisma. The mob, confident in their victory, has grown complacent. Their sentries are few and disorganized. Belisarius and his men burst through the gateway. At first, the people inside the stadium are confused. They think these are more soldiers defecting to their cause. Then they see the drawn swords, the implacable, disciplined advance of the imperial guards. A wave of screams ripples through the section of the crowd nearest the box as they realize what is happening. Simultaneously, on the opposite side of the Hippodrome, General Mundus and his mercenaries crash through the gate they call the Gate of the Dead, a grimly fitting name. They pour into the stands from a second direction, sealing the exits. The trap is sprung. The vast crowd, which moments before had felt so powerful, is now packed together, cornered, with no way to escape. They are an unarmed mass of civilians facing two columns of professional, merciless soldiers. What follows is not a battle. It is a slaughter. The historians' accounts of the numbers are stark. Within a few short hours, the joyous roar of coronation turned into a cacophony of terror. The soldiers worked their way through the stands, their swords rising and falling. The floor of the Hippodrome, the very ground where the Nika chant had begun, was slick with blood. There was no distinction made between blue and green. They were all rebels now. The political and religious fervor that had fueled the riots dissolved into a singular, primal instinct, survival. But there was nowhere to run. By the time the sun began to set on the burning city, the Hippodrome was silent once more. The rioting was over. Hypatius, the emperor of a few hours, was dragged before Justinian along with his brother. They begged for their lives, claiming they had been forced into the role by the mob. But mercy had fled the city. Justinian, now firmly back in control, ordered them executed. and their bodies cast into the sea. The Nika riots were over. Conservative estimates placed the number of dead inside the Hippodrome that day at over 30,000 people. The blues and the greens, as powerful political entities, were shattered. Never again would they challenge emperors so directly. In the aftermath, Justinian and Theodora began to rebuild. From the ashes of the burnt-out sections of Constantinople rose new, even grander structures, including their crowning achievement, the magnificent Church of Hagia Sophia. But the city was forever changed. It was now a city that understood, in the most brutal terms, the will of its rulers. And so, you can let your mind drift away from that day, away from the smoke and the shouting, away from the cold resolve of an empress and the chilling silence that followed the storm. Let it float back to the quiet of your own time, to the peace of this room. The bloodiest chariot race in Roman history has ended, and all that remains is the deep, quiet hum of the past. The forbidden affairs of Roman emperors and their slaves. Settle back now and let your breathing slow. Feel the weight of your day begin to lift, drifting away like dust in a sunbeam. We are going on a journey, not across oceans, but through time. Allow your mind to become quiet, still, and open as we travel back to an empire of marble and legend. You find yourself standing under the shade of a cypress tree. The air is warm and dry, fragrant with the scent of pine needles, sun-baked earth, and a distant, sweet perfume of jasmine. Before you stretches a city that is the center of the entire known world. This is Rome. The year is somewhere in the early 2nd century AD, during the height of the empire's power and prestige. You are not down in the noisy, chaotic heart of the city, not in the crowded forum where merchants shout and lawyers argue. You are somewhere higher, more serene. You are on the Palatine Hill, the original and most exclusive neighborhood in Rome. It is a place of such immense power and wealth that its very name, Palatium, will one day give the world the word palace. This hill is a sprawling, interconnected complex of villas, courtyards, and state offices. This is the imperial residence, the beating heart of Roman authority. As you walk, your sandals are silent on intricate mosaic floors that depict swirling dolphins or dramatic scenes from Greek mythology. You pass through open-air colonnades, where fountains splash musically into marble basins, the water catching the bright Italian sun. The sound is a gentle, constant whisper, designed to soothe and impress. This is a world run by an invisible army. In the quiet corridors, you catch glimpses of them. Slaves, hundreds, no, thousands of them, moving with quiet efficiency. A man in a simple tunic hurries by, carrying a silver tray laden with figs and honeyed wine. 2 women gossip quietly as they mend a fine linen garment, their fingers nimble. These people are the gears and levers of the imperial machine. They are the cooks, the cleaners, the scribes, the stable hands, the body servants, the bath attendants. The Romans were champions of hyper-specialization. There was likely a slave whose sole job was to arrange the emperor's scrolls in an aesthetically pleasing manner, and another whose entire career was dedicated to the proper warming of his bath towels. A bit like a modern corporation, but with significantly fewer team-building exercises. To understand our story tonight, you must first understand the fundamental and uncrossable line that separates the people who own from the people who are owned. In Rome, a slave was legally defined not as a person, but as property, an instrumentum vocale, a tool that speaks. This brutal legal reality governed everything. And this brings us to the private life of the man who lives here, the emperor himself. When it came to an emperor's personal affairs, Roman society had a very specific, and perhaps to us, a very strange set of rules. The primary expectation was that he produce a legitimate heir with his socially and politically appropriate wife, an empress chosen from the right aristocratic family. This was a matter of state, a dynastic duty. But beyond that duty, Roman morality was not overly concerned with an emperor's private liaisons. What mattered was not the gender of his partners, but their status. For a powerful Roman man to have an intimate relationship with a person of a lower class, a servant, a performer, or a slave, male or female, was not just accepted. It was almost expected. It was a demonstration of his power, another perk of the job, like having the best seats at the Colosseum or not having to pay taxes. So, when we speak of a forbidden affair, we are not speaking of something that was illegal or even widely condemned on moral grounds. The act itself was not the scandal. The affair became forbidden when the emperor crossed an invisible line. It was forbidden to show weakness. It was forbidden to surrender power. It was forbidden to treat a speaking tool as an equal. The true transgression was not desire, but love. It was one thing to use a slave for your pleasure. It was quite another to fall in love with them, to elevate them, to show them public affection, or, worst of all, to grieve for them as you would a member of your own family. To do so was to invert the natural order of things. It was a sign that the emperor, the man who was master of the world, had allowed himself to become mastered by his own emotions. This was the ultimate political vulnerability. It was un-Roman. It was a scandal waiting to happen. We see this complex dynamic written in the very walls around you. As you wander deeper into the palace, you might pass the emperor's private study, the door guarded by stoic Praetorian guards. Inside, the emperor isn't just a ruler. He's a man. And like any man, he has desires and companionship needs that are not always fulfilled by a politically arranged marriage. A mainstream historical fact of Roman life is that many wealthy households, including the imperial one, featured a system where a master might have long-term relationships with specific, favored slaves. These individuals, sometimes called delicii or delights, were often educated, beautiful, and chosen for their charm and companionship. But what did this mean for the slave? Here, the historical record falls quiet, and the lines begin to blur. Historians still argue whether these relationships were always and only rooted in coercion, or if, within this deeply unequal framework, genuine bonds of affection and loyalty could sometimes form. Could a slave, whose entire existence was predicated on serving the whims of another, truly feel love? Or was it merely a survival strategy, a performance of affection to secure a more comfortable life, to avoid the back-breaking labor of a quarry or a farm? We have the poetry and letters of the masters, but the voices of the slaves themselves are almost entirely lost to us, leaving us to guess at the heart behind the servant's mask. It is in this space of unspoken rules and unequal power that our story truly begins. The stage is set on this grand hill, in this world of absolute authority and absolute servitude. Here, a quirky but telling tidbit of Roman life was the legal status of children born from such unions. Any child born to a female slave was automatically a slave themselves, belonging to her master, regardless of who the father was, even if it was the emperor. It was a brutally simple way of keeping the social hierarchy locked in place. The emperor's official bloodline was guarded, while his personal affections were, quite literally, disenfranchised from birth. You find yourself in a quiet, secluded garden, away from the state apartments. The air is still. The only sounds are the buzzing of bees in the lavender and the distant murmur of the city below. It feels peaceful here, a place of quiet contemplation, but this peace is fragile. It relies on everyone, especially the men at the very top, playing their part, respecting the unspoken boundaries. It relies on the emperor keeping his heart shielded, his affections contained, and his power absolute. And as the afternoon sun begins its long, slow descent towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the perfect lawns, you get the sense that this delicate balance is about to be disturbed. Somewhere within these gilded walls is an emperor who is different, a restless soul, a man more interested in art and philosophy than in Senate debates, a traveler who will not be content to stay within this beautiful, suffocating cage on the Palatine. He is about to leave Rome, and on his journey across the empire, he will meet someone who will cause him to break every one of these ancient, unspoken rules. The hushed, orderly world of the Palatine Hill begins to fade from your mind's eye. The scent of jasmine and cypress gives way to the salty tang of sea air and the humid warmth of a different shore. You are no longer in the heart of the empire, but on its periphery, traveling with the imperial court itself. Let yourself settle into the rhythm of this journey. The slow creak of a carriage wheel, the soft thud of horses hooves on a dusty road, the gentle lap of waves against the hull of a ship. This is the life of the Emperor Hadrian. Unlike his predecessor, Trajan, who was a conqueror, and unlike many emperors who rarely strayed far from Rome, Hadrian is a restless soul. He is a man possessed by a deep and abiding curiosity about the vast domains he rules. He is arguably the most traveled emperor in Roman history, spending more than half of his 21-year reign outside of Italy. He wants to see the empire not as a map, but as a living, breathing entity. He inspects troops on the frontier in Britain. He walks through the ancient temples of Greece. He consults with scholars in Alexandria. You find yourself in his entourage, a silent observer trailing in the dust of the imperial procession. It is a massive undertaking, a mobile city of administrators, guards, architects, artists, servants, and friends. You pass through bustling provincial towns where locals line the streets, desperate for a glimpse of the remote, almost godlike figure who rules them. Hadrian is in his early 40s now, a man in his prime. He is of Spanish origin, the first of a line of emperors from the provinces, and he sports a neatly trimmed beard, a fashion choice that breaks with the clean-shaven look of his predecessors. It is said he grew it to hide some facial imperfections, but it quickly becomes a trend across the empire, a bit like a modern celebrity's haircut. Every aspiring intellectual in Rome suddenly feels the need to look ruggedly philosophical. Our journey takes us to the province of Bithynia, in what is now northwestern Turkey. It is a region of lush green hills and a rugged coastline along the Black Sea. It is a land with deep Greek roots, steeped in Hellenic culture and history. And Hadrian, a passionate Philhellene, a lover of all things Greek, feels at home here. It is in Bithynia, around the year 123 AD, that a young man is brought into the emperor's circle. His name is Antinous. He is a local boy from the town of Gladiators. We know almost nothing about his family or his early life. What we do know is that he was a Greek youth of startling, almost ethereal beauty. Surviving sculptures, of which there will be many, show a young man with a full head of thick, curling hair, a soft, rounded face, full lips, and a melancholic, introspective expression. He looks less like a Roman and more like the idealized youths from classical Greek statuary. He enters Hadrian's service. Officially, he may have been a page or a cupbearer, one of many young attendants. But it soon becomes clear to everyone in the traveling court that his role is something far more significant. The emperor, a man known for his sharp intellect and sometimes prickly, demanding personality, is utterly captivated. Hadrian is a complex man. He is a brilliant administrator and a military reformer who solidifies the empire's borders. His wall in Britain is a testament to his focus on defense over expansion. But he is also a poet and architect, a student of astrology and philosophy. He surrounds himself with thinkers and artists. He and his wife, the Empress Sabina, have what appears to be a formal and distant relationship. It fulfills his dynastic duty, but offers little in the way of emotional connection. In Antinous, Hadrian seems to find a companion who speaks not to his role as emperor, but to his soul as a Philhellene. Antinous is not a Roman aristocrat. He is not a military man or a political rival. He is a quiet Greek youth, a living embodiment of the Hellenic ideal that Hadrian so adores. It is in this dynamic that the forbidden line begins to be crossed. This is no longer a simple, transactional relationship between master and slave, a powerful man and a delicium. The sheer intensity of the emperor's focus on this one boy signals to everyone that this is different. You see them together, perhaps walking through the colonnades of a Greek city, Hadrian gesturing animatedly at a piece of architecture, explaining its history, while Antinous listens, his gaze fixed on the emperor. Or you see them at a banquet, where Antinous reclines near Hadrian, no longer a servant but a guest of honor. They hunt together. A famous surviving relief shows them on a lion hunt, a powerful and symbolic activity usually reserved for equals. This is the mainstream historical fact that alerts us to the uniqueness of their bond. The constant, public proximity. Hadrian does not hide his affection. He flaunts it. And this makes the Roman traditionalists in his entourage deeply uncomfortable. The gossip would have been relentless, whispered in shadowed corners of the camp. They would have noted the expensive gifts, the special honors, the way the emperor's mood seemed to hinge on the presence of this provincial boy. The sarcastic asides would write themselves. The master of the world seems to have found his own master. Historians still argue whether Antinous was a slave when he met Hadrian. Some sources are vague, but the context strongly suggests he was of a low social status, if not explicitly a slave. Even if he was a free provincial, the power imbalance was so vast as to make the distinction almost meaningless. He had no power to refuse the emperor's favor. But did that favor feel like an honor or a burden? Did he reciprocate Hadrian's deep affection? We will never know. His voice is lost. All we have is Hadrian's reaction, his obsession, projected onto the silent, beautiful face of the young man. As the imperial tour continues, leaving Bithynia behind and moving through the eastern provinces of Asia Minor and Syria, Antinous is a constant presence at Hadrian's side. He is there for years. This is not a fleeting infatuation. This is a deep, abiding attachment. A strange and quirky tidbit from this time is the rumor that Hadrian, a known enthusiast of divination and magic, consulted oracles about his and Antinous' future. The shadowy world of prophecy and omens hung over their relationship, with some whispers suggesting that the boy's life was somehow mystically linked to the emperor's well-being. The years pass. Antinous grows from a teenager into a young man of about 19 or 20. His soft, youthful features take on a more somber cast. The relationship, born in the green hills of Bithynia, is now approaching a new, fateful destination. The entire imperial court is preparing for the next great leg of the journey, a grand tour up the Nile River, in the ancient and mysterious land of Egypt. You can feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the court. The novelty of the emperor's favorite has worn off, replaced by a kind of weary resignation among the officials. The affair is no longer a scandal in the making. It is simply a fact of their lives. But as they prepare the fleet of barges that will carry them up the sacred river, an unspoken tension lingers in the hot, dry air. It is a feeling that this strange, unprecedented love story, played out on the grand stage of the Roman Empire, is drifting toward an unknown and possibly tragic conclusion. The warm, familiar landscape of the Hellenic world recedes. Your journey with the imperial court now takes you to a place of far greater antiquity, a land of stark, breathtaking contrasts. You have arrived in Egypt. Let your mind drift down onto the banks of a mighty river. This is the Nile, the lifeblood of this ancient province. The air here is different, drier, hotter, filled with the scent of sun-baked mud and the faint, dusty smell of millennia. On one side of the river, you see a ribbon of impossible green, fertile fields of wheat and flax, vibrant and teeming with life. On the other side, stretching to the horizon, is the pale, silent expanse of the desert. Life and death, side by side. You find yourself aboard one of the ships in the imperial flotilla. It is not a simple boat, but a luxurious floating villa, a thalamigas. Its sails are dyed imperial purple, and its wooden decks are shaded by silk awnings to protect the emperor and his entourage from the relentless sun. The journey is slow, a majestic, unhurried procession up the sacred river. It is October. In the year 130 AD, the annual flood of the Nile has receded, leaving the land renewed. It is a time for pilgrimage and reflection. The Emperor Hadrian is in his element. He is fascinated by Egyptian religion, its animal-headed gods, its complex rituals, and its profound obsession with the afterlife. He explores ancient temples, his scholarly mind absorbing every detail. But there is a shadow on this voyage, a tension that coils beneath the surface of the court's day-to-day routine. Antinous is here, of course. He is always by Hadrian's side, but you notice a change in him. The sculptures we have of him from this period show that his face, while still beautiful, has lost some of its youthful softness. There is a deep, brooding quality to his expression, a somberness that seems out of place on a young man of 20. The initial excitement of being the emperor's favorite has, perhaps, given way to the heavy reality of his position. He lives in a gilded cage, beloved but never free, his every move watched and judged by the Roman aristocrats who surround him, many of whom likely view him with a mixture of envy and contempt. The imperial fleet glides south. They pass the pyramids at Giza, colossal ghosts from a forgotten age. They visit the great religious center of Heliopolis. It is a journey steeped in mysticism. In this land, the line between the world of the living and the world of the gods feels thin, almost porous. The Egyptians believe in powerful magic, in spells that can alter fate, and in sacrifices that can appease the gods or even transfer vitality from one person to another. And then, on or around the 24th of October, it happens. The great, unexplainable tragedy at the heart of our story. Near the religious site of Hermopolis, Antinous is dead. He drowned in the Nile. That is the only fact upon which everyone agrees. The how and the why of it, however, are immediately shrouded in mystery and contradiction, becoming one of the great unsolved puzzles of Roman history. The official story, the one released by the palace, is that it was a simple, tragic accident. A young man, perhaps leaning too far over the rail of the barge, slipped and fell into the murky, crocodile-infested waters. A terrible, but mundane, accident. Nobody believed it. It felt too neat, too convenient, and it failed to explain the sheer, cataclysmic grief that immediately consumed the emperor. You can picture the scene, the frantic shouts, the crew pointing at the swirling water, the awful, stomach-dropping silence that follows as they realize he is gone, pulled under by the river's slow, powerful current. And then there is Hadrian. His reaction is not the contained, dignified sorrow expected of a Roman emperor. He doesn't just mourn, he shatters. The ancient historian Cassius Dio tells us that Hadrian wept for him like a woman, a deeply scornful and gendered critique that reveals exactly why such a display was so scandalous. He was not just sad. He was inconsolable, his grief described as unrestrained. He had violated the core tenet of Roman masculinity and imperial decorum, control over one's emotions. His love for Antinous, once a private indulgence that was tolerated, has now erupted into a public spectacle of weakness. The forbidden line has been utterly obliterated. The whispers and alternative theories begin almost immediately, spreading through the court and eventually the entire empire. Some suggest it was a political assassination, perhaps a jealous faction within the court, tired of the boy's influence, arranged for him to have an accident, a quiet push in the dark, a convenient silencing. It's the plot of a good mystery novel, but hard to prove. A more complex and fascinating theory delves into the mystical atmosphere of their journey. Some ancient sources, a quirky and fringe tidbit of a sort, suggest Antinous committed a form of ritual suicide. The story goes that Hadrian's health was failing, and an oracle had declared that the emperor's life could only be prolonged if another, younger life was voluntarily sacrificed in his place. In this version, Antinous, out of supreme love and loyalty, secretly threw himself into the Nile as a human offering to save his emperor. It is a deeply romantic and dramatic tale, one that paints Antinous not as a victim, but as a hero of tragic love. Historians still argue which theory is most plausible. Was it accident, murder, or a sacrifice? Some modern scholars have even proposed that Antinous may have taken his own life out of despair. Perhaps he saw no future for himself. He was growing older, his youthful beauty fading. Would the emperor's affection fade with it? What would become of him when he was no longer the emperor's delight? Perhaps, in the land of the Nile, where death was seen not as an end, but as a transition, he saw a way out of his impossible life. We will never know the truth. Antinous' own thoughts are as silent and lost as his body in the depths of the river. But for Hadrian, the why does not matter. The only thing that matters is that Antinous is gone. And in the crushing weight of his grief, Hadrian will do something no emperor has ever done before. His response will not be to hide his scandalous love and move on. It will be to defy Roman tradition, to defy his critics, and to carve his forbidden love into the very stone and memory of the empire itself. As the imperial fleet sits anchored on the Nile, under a sky now empty of its brightest star, a plan begins to form in the emperor's grief-stricken mind. A plan of commemoration so vast, so extravagant, so utterly unprecedented, that it will ensure the name of a humble boy from Bithynia will never be forgotten. The sorrow-haunted fleet completes its journey up the Nile and turns back. But the mood of the imperial court is forever altered. The air is no longer filled with the excitement of discovery, but with the heavy, uncomfortable silence of an emperor's all-consuming grief. The world has gone gray for Hadrian. His response to the death of Antinous is where our story shifts from a scandalous affair into an act of breathtaking religious and political rebellion. You watch as Hadrian, a man whose primary public image was that of a stoic, bearded intellectual and a pragmatist, channels the full, unrestrained power of his office into a singular, obsessive purpose, immortalizing his lost love. This is no longer just about personal feeling. It becomes an act of state. His first and most audacious act takes place right there, on the banks of the Nile, at the very spot where Antinous had drowned. He commands the founding of a new city, not a small settlement or a memorial, but a grand, magnificent Greek-style polis. He names it Antinopolis, the city of Antinous. It is an act of creation on an astonishing scale, fueled by grief. Architects and workers are summoned. A grid of streets is laid out. Temples, a theater, a hippodrome for chariot races, All the features of a major urban center are planned. For an emperor to found a city named after himself was common. Think of Alexandria or Constantinople. But to found a city named after your non-Roman, low-status lover? This was beyond comprehension. It was like naming a capital city after your favorite pet. It defied all logic and precedent. This is just the beginning. As the court makes its slow journey back toward Rome, a decree goes out across the empire. Antinous is to be declared a god. Let that sink in for a moment. The deification of emperors themselves was a well-established tradition, a mainstream historical fact. Augustus, the first emperor, had been declared a god by the Senate after his death. It was a political tool, a way of cementing the imperial family's divine right to rule. But it was reserved for the emperor, and occasionally his direct family members. It was a formal, state-sanctioned process. Hadrian bypasses all of it. He doesn't ask the Senate. He simply declares it. Antinous, the boy from Bithynia, is now a deity. Temples are to be built in his honor. A new cult is established, with its own priests and sacred rites. He is to be worshipped, and worship him they did. This is where the story becomes truly strange. You might expect this bizarre, top-down religion to be met with cynicism and fail spectacularly. But it doesn't. The cult of Antinous becomes remarkably popular, especially in the Greek-speaking eastern provinces. He is syncretized with existing gods, becoming Antinous Osiris in Egypt, the dying and rising god, a direct parallel to the boy who drowned in the Nile. In other places, he is merged with Hermes or Dionysus. His youth, his beauty, and his tragic death made him a relatable, romantic figure. People started naming their children after him. A new star was even discovered and proclaimed to be the boy's soul ascending to the heavens, a celestial tribute likely orchestrated by Hadrian's court astrologers. This a quirky fringe tidbit that feels more like modern PR than ancient religion, showing the lengths to which Hadrian went to craft this narrative. And then comes the art. Hadrian commissions a staggering number of sculptures of his beloved. From workshops across the empire, statues and busts of Antinous pour forth. They depict him in every possible guise, as a youthful Greek hero, as an Egyptian pharaoh, as the god of wine. This is why we know his face so well today. More sculptures of Antinous survive from antiquity than of almost any Roman emperor, except Augustus and Hadrian himself. It is a mass-produced, empire-wide campaign of remembrance. Back in Rome, you can imagine the reaction among the old guard senators. Their private whispers would have turned into open disgust. An emperor weeping like a woman was bad enough. Founding a city was madness. But creating a new god out of his foreign plaything? This was an offense against the Roman gods, against the Senate, against decency itself. It confirmed their worst fears. Their emperor's mind had been unbalanced by his un-Roman passions. He had allowed his private grief to corrupt his public duty. Historians still argue whether Hadrian's actions were born purely of grief-stricken love, or if there was a shrewd political motive as well, a way to create a new, unifying religious figure in the diverse eastern provinces, a loyal cult that looked directly to the emperor, bypassing local traditions. The truth is probably a mixture of both profound love and political opportunism. Hadrian continues to rule for another 8 years, but the joy seems to have gone out of his life. He commissions a lavish, sprawling villa for himself at Tivoli, outside Rome. It is a masterpiece of architecture, a miniature empire with buildings named after places he had visited, many with Antinous. Even here, in his final retreat, his memory is everywhere. You can imagine him wandering the gardens, past shimmering pools and silent, beautiful statues of the boy, an old man surrounded by the ghosts of his own making. When Hadrian dies, the Senate is so hostile that they initially refuse to deify him as was customary. They want to nullify all of his acts, including, one assumes, the bizarre cult of his lover. He is only saved this final indignity by the strenuous efforts of his chosen successor, Antoninus Pius. And so, the forbidden affair ends. It's a story that challenges all of our simple categories. It is a story of unequal power, but also, perhaps, of genuine love. A story of a speaking tool who became a god, of an emperor who defied every rule of his society, not for power or for conquest, but for a grief he could not contain. Allow your mind now to gently drift away from the marble statues and the sun-drenched ruins. Leave Hadrian to his memories in his grand villa. The voices of the past grow quiet, replaced by the stillness of your own time. The affair, once scandalous and forbidden, has softened with the centuries into a strange and melancholy tale of a love that was, in the end, etched into the stone of history, a permanent monument to an emotion that refused to be forgotten. What happened if you cheated on your spouse in Rome? Let the world outside your window begin to soften and blur. Let your focus narrow to just the sound of my voice and the gentle rise and fall of your own breath. We are going to drift back in time together, floating on a quiet current until we land softly in the heart of a great empire. You find yourself not on a battlefield or in a bustling public square, but in the peaceful, cool center of a Roman house, a domus. It is late afternoon in the 1st century BC, during the final years of the Roman Republic. The city's noise, the rumble of cartwheels on stone, the distant shouts of merchants is muffled here, a low thrum that only serves to emphasize the tranquility of this private space. You are standing in the atrium, the main hall of the house. Above you, an opening in the roof, the compluvium, lets in a perfect square of the deep blue Italian sky. Below it, a shallow pool. The impluvium catches the occasional rainwater and glimmers in the soft light. The air is still and smells faintly of water, stone, and the subtle scent of incense burning on a small family altar in the corner. This house belongs to a man of some importance, a senator, perhaps, or a wealthy landowner. His family's wax portrait masks, the imagines, stare down from wooden cabinets with blank, solemn eyes, a constant reminder of the weight of ancestry and expectation. This is a place of order, of tradition, a place where every person and every object has its proper place. It is in this ordered world that we will explore a very disordered subject. What happened if you cheated on your spouse? But to understand Rome's answer to that question, you first have to set aside our modern ideas about love, romance, and betrayal. For the Romans, especially of this class, marriage was not primarily a romantic union. It was a strategic alliance, a contract designed to merge fortunes, forge political bonds, and, most importantly, produce legitimate children to carry on the family name and inherit the family property. And so, infidelity wasn't really a crime of the heart. It was a crime against property. This is the key that unlocks the whole puzzle, and it starts with the absolute authority of the man of the house, the paterfamilias. He is the legal and spiritual head of the family. He owns everything, the house, the land, the slaves, and in a very real legal sense, his own wife and children. Let's imagine him, our senator, returning home. His day in the Curia is done. He expects his home to be a sanctuary of order. His definition of adultery, or adulterium, is startlingly specific and incredibly one-sided. It would not be considered adultery for him to have a relationship with a slave, a prostitute, or a foreigner. This was seen as a simple, unremarkable exercise of his status. No one would raise an eyebrow. His actions only became a crime if he became involved with the wife of another Roman citizen. Why? Because in doing so, he would be trespassing on another man's property. It's less about passion and more about poor form, like letting your goat graze in your neighbor's prized vegetable garden. Now, let's consider his wife, the Matrona. For her, the rules are entirely different. As you watch her directing the household slaves, her demeanor poised and dignified, you understand that her most sacred duty is to provide her husband with heirs whose paternity is beyond question. The entire structure of Roman inheritance, property law, and social status rests on the certainty of the bloodline. Therefore, any affair she has is adulterium. It doesn't matter if her partner is a senator or a humble potter, married or single. By taking a lover, she introduces a catastrophic uncertainty. Is the son she bears truly her husband's? Or is he the child of another man? An illegitimate heir could inherit a fortune and a famous name he has no right to. This was a threat to the very foundations of the Roman social order. Her body, in this legal framework, was the vessel of the family's future, and her fidelity was not a matter of personal morality, but of public trust. Before the time of our story's great changes, how was this handled? It was a private family matter. A deeply held mainstream historical fact is the power of the paterfamilias known as vita nescis potestas, the power of life and death over his household. If he caught his wife in the act of adultery, ancient law gave him the right to kill her on the spot. He was also, in theory, obligated to kill her partner if he was caught under the same roof. It was his duty to cleanse his house of this profound dishonor. Now, before you picture every Roman husband as a murderous tyrant, it's important to note that historians still argue whether this ancient right was commonly exercised by the late Republic. By this period, society had become more, let's say, civilized. To kill your wife was extreme and would likely invite social scorn and potential legal trouble from her own powerful family, who would not appreciate their daughter being dispatched without a very good reason and perhaps the return of her dowry. It was more of a legal fossil, a relic of a harsher time, but it was still there, a terrifying symbol of the husband's ultimate authority. A quirky and telling tidbit from Roman daily life that illustrates this control is the so-called rite of the kiss, or ius osculi. A Roman woman was expected to greet her male relatives by kissing them on the mouth. This wasn't about affection. It was an ancient custom believed to have originated as a way for the men to check if she had been drinking wine, which for much of Roman history was strictly forbidden for respectable women. It's a small, intimate gesture that contains a world of suspicion and control. So, more often than a dramatic execution, a cheating wife would face a family council. Picture it. She would be brought before her husband, her father, perhaps her brothers and uncles. The men of the family would sit in judgment. The sentence was usually divorce, disgrace, and the return of her dowry. She would be cast out of her husband's home, her reputation destroyed. In a world where a woman's value was tied to her role as a wife and mother, this was a form of social death. But the winds of change are blowing through the streets of Rome. The Republic is faltering, racked by civil wars and political corruption. The old moral certainties are eroding. The aristocracy is becoming famously decadent. Divorces are common. Affairs are rampant, and people are less discreet. The private, family-based system for dealing with infidelity is proving inadequate for what some see as a city-wide moral sickness. And one man, a rising political star named Octavian, soon to be the Emperor Augustus, is watching this decay with a grim and calculating eye. He believes that the strength of Rome rests on the strength of its families, and he has a plan to restore that strength. A plan that will take the private shame of the atrium and drag it, kicking and screaming, into the public light of a courtroom. The quiet, sun-dappled atrium begins to dissolve. Let your mind float forward a few years into a new era. The bloody civil wars have ended. The Roman Republic is a republic in name only. One man now holds all the power. His name is Augustus, and he is Rome's first emperor. You find yourself standing near the Temple of Saturn in the Roman Forum, the sprawling, chaotic heart of the city. This is the political, commercial, and social epicenter of the empire. Senators in their white, purple-striped togas hurry toward the Curia. Lawyers declaim loudly to captive audiences, and merchants haggle over the price of everything from Egyptian grain to Spanish olive oil. The air buzzes with energy and ambition. But alongside this vibrant public life, Augustus sees a private decay that he believes threatens the very soul of Rome. The aristocratic elite, in his view, have become self-indulgent and morally soft. The divorce rate is high, the birth rate among the upper classes is alarmingly low, and high-profile affairs are the talk of every dinner party. He looks at this behavior and doesn't just see private vice. He sees a threat to the long-term stability of the state he has worked so hard to build. If the leading families of Rome won't produce the next generation of generals, governors, and administrators, the whole system could collapse. It's a national security crisis disguised as a soap opera. And so, around 18 BC, Augustus decides to act. He is a master of political theater and public relations, and he frames his new program as a great moral crusade, a return to the virtues of old Rome. He enacts a series of laws, known collectively as the Julian laws on marriage and morals, named after his own clan, the Julii. This is a mainstream historical fact that represents one of the most significant social engineering projects in ancient history. These laws are revolutionary because they do something unprecedented. They transform adultery from a private, family disgrace into a public crime. It is no longer up to a husband or a father to deal with an unfaithful wife. It is now the business of the state. Imagine the shockwave this sends through the Roman elite. For centuries, what happened within the walls of their domus was their business alone. Suddenly, the government is claiming a right to barge into their bedrooms. It would be like the tax office suddenly demanding to review your private text messages. Let's walk through the specifics, because they are fascinatingly detailed. Under the new Lex Julia D, adultery is coerced into the Julian law on coercing adultery. The definition of the crime remains deeply one-sided. It is still primarily about a married woman's infidelity. A husband's dalliances with non-citizens, slaves, or infamous persons like prostitutes and actresses still don't count. Remember that little detail about crocodile dung sunscreen from our other journeys? An actress using such a cosmetic was considered low status, but the emperor sleeping with her was just. Tuesday. However, the law did close one loophole for men. If a husband was caught in a long-term, stable affair, a sort of shadow marriage called stuprum, with an unmarried freeborn woman of good standing, like a senator's daughter, he could now be prosecuted. This was an attempt to protect the marriage prospects of respectable virgins. But the real force of the law is directed at the cheating wife. A husband who discovered his wife's affair now had a legal obligation to divorce her immediately and then, within 60 days, formally prosecute both her and her lover in a special public court. This is the radical change. He has to. If he chooses to look the other way, if he loves his wife and wants to forgive her, or if he simply wants to avoid a public scandal, he can now be prosecuted himself. For what? For profiting from her affair. He becomes a lino, a pimp. The law assumes that the only reason a man would keep a cheating wife is if her lover were paying him off. The old, fearsome right of the husband to kill his wife on the spot is abolished. Now, he's only allowed to kill her lover, and only under a very specific set of circumstances. He has to catch him in flagrante delicto in his own house. And the lover must be of a lower social class like a gladiator or an actor. If the lover is a fellow senator, the husband can only detain him for up to 20 hours while he gathers witnesses. A very quirky and frankly bizarre tidbit of legal protection among the elite. One can picture the awkward conversation. Gaius, I'm terribly sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you to wait here in the atrium while I get my neighbor to confirm that you are, in fact, here. Can I get you a cup of wine? The penalties are severe. A woman convicted of adultery would lose half of her dowry and 1/3 of her property. Then, she would be banished, exiled, to a remote, windswept island. A small, barren rock in the Mediterranean was the preferred choice. She could never remarry, and she was forced to wear the drab, rough clothing of a prostitute, forever marked by her shame. Her lover, if also convicted, would face a similar fate. His property would be confiscated, and he too would be exiled, though probably to a different, equally unpleasant island. No chance of them reconciling in a scenic Mediterranean location. The law creates a new profession. The informant. Anyone, a disgruntled slave, a jealous neighbor, a political rival, could bring a charge of adultery if the husband failed to do so within the 60-day window. Historians still argue whether Augustus's true motive was moral reform, or if he cleverly designed the laws as a political weapon. With these new rules, he could easily remove his political enemies from the Senate by digging up a convenient scandal, prosecuting them, and confiscating their wealth, all under the noble guise of restoring public morality. You can feel the social fabric of Rome begin to shift. Private lives are no longer private. The potential for scandal is everywhere. A stray glance at a dinner party, a letter intercepted by a suspicious slave, a whispered rumor, all of it could now lead to public ruin, a courtroom, and a one-way trip to an island prison. The old system of family justice, with all its brutal patriarchal power, has been replaced by a system of state justice, with its own cold, unforgiving calculus. The age of secrets is ending. The age of public spectacle is about to begin. Let the broad, bustling panorama of the forum fade away. We are going to move indoors now, into a building that represents the tangible, intimidating reality of Augustus's new moral order. The air here is close, heavy with the scent of unwashed bodies, perfumed oils, and the papyrus of legal scrolls. You are in a Roman basilica, which at this time is not a church, but a public law court. Settle yourself onto a hard wooden bench in the public gallery. This is the new theater of Roman scandal. Before Augustus's laws, a wife's affair would have been dealt with behind the closed doors of her family's domus. A quiet, humiliating confrontation in the atrium, followed by a silent, shameful departure. Now, thanks to the Lex Julia, her private life is the star of a public show, complete with lawyers, witnesses, and a paying audience, so to speak. The case today involves a woman from a respectable, if not top-tier, noble family. Let's call her Vipsania. She sits on a low stool in the center of the hall, her face veiled, though the thin fabric does little to hide the tremors of her shoulders. Her husband, who was legally required to bring this prosecution, sits grimly on the accuser's bench. On the other side is the man accused of being her lover, a handsome young equestrian who looks profoundly uncomfortable, as if he's just realized that a few moments of passion are about to cost him his inheritance and his freedom. The presiding magistrate sits on a high-backed chair, the sella curulus, a symbol of his authority. The jury, a panel of senators and equestrians, listens with expressions ranging from stern judgment to bored indifference. It's probably the third adultery case they've heard this week. This public trial is, in itself, a form of punishment. The core concept of a Roman matron's life was pudicitia, a blend of modesty, chastity, and loyalty. Her reputation was her most valuable asset. The mere act of being here, of having her name and her most intimate actions discussed openly, has already destroyed it forever, regardless of the verdict. The prosecution begins. The husband's lawyer, a man with a booming voice and a flair for the dramatic, starts to build his case. He doesn't just present facts. He paints a picture of moral corrosion. He speaks of Vipsania's alleged extravagance, her supposed fondness for Greek poetry, always a sign of loose morals, apparently, and her scandalous decision to attend a dinner party without her husband. It's a character assassination disguised as a legal argument. Then, the witnesses are called. This is where things get truly messy and personal. The law had specific requirements for witnesses. One of the more peculiar and quirky legal tidbits of the era was that the testimony of one's own slaves was only considered valid if it was extracted under torture. The grim logic was that a slave's loyalty to their master was so absolute that they would only tell a truth that contradicted that loyalty if subjected to extreme duress. So, Vipsania's personal maid, a woman who has brushed her hair and arranged her robes for years, could be brought forward, her testimony obtained through unspeakable means. The oral component of this, the law allowed for the screams from the torture chamber to be part of the court proceedings, would add a layer of horror to the legal drama. The maid's testimony, read out by a clerk, might detail secret meetings, of notes passed through the market, of a lover climbing a garden wall after dark. Next comes a doorman from the lover's apartment building, then a tavern owner who saw them sharing a cup of wine, a dangerously intimate act for a matron. Each testimony adds another stone to the wall closing in around her. This is the machinery of public shaming in action. A mainstream historical fact is that Roman court proceedings, especially in the hands of a master orator like Cicero a generation earlier, were famous for their use of personal attacks or ad hominem arguments. The defense lawyer for Vipsania doesn't necessarily try to prove her innocence in a modern sense. He might not have an alibi to offer. Instead, he attacks the accusers. He might argue that the husband is a hypocrite, known for his own affairs. He might claim that a key witness is a notorious liar, in debt to the husband's family. He could even try to smear the character of the alleged lover, painting him as a predator and Vipsania as his innocent victim. A difficult but not impossible strategy. Historians still argue about the day-to-day effectiveness of these laws. Did they genuinely reduce adultery? Or did they just make people more careful? Did they empower jealous husbands and political rivals? Or did they actually offer women a strange kind of protection by abolishing the husband's ancient right to kill them? In a way, a sentence of exile to a lonely island, while bleak, is arguably better than immediate death in your own atrium. The laws are a double-edged sword. They drag a woman's reputation through the public mud, but they might just let her keep her life. You look at Vipsania, huddled on her stool. The weight of the process is crushing. She cannot speak for herself. Her defense is entirely in the hands of her lawyer. Her fate will be decided by this jury of men, based on a combination of evidence, rumor, and the rhetorical skill of the speakers. The final speeches are made. The lawyer for the husband sums up with a passionate appeal to the ancient values of Rome, to the sanctity of the bloodline, and the duty of every citizen to uphold the moral standards set by the divine Emperor Augustus himself. He points a finger at Vipsania, calling her a stain on her noble family. The jury then votes, each man casting a small wax tablet into an urn. The magistrate counts the votes. A silence falls over the packed basilica. It is a silence heavy with the future of two people, their families, and their fortunes. The magistrate stands. He announces the verdict. Guilty. A low gasp ripples through the courtroom. Vipsania seems to collapse in on herself. Her lover stares blankly ahead, his face ashen, The sentence is automatic: forfeiture of property, banishment for life. They will be taken from the court, put on separate ships, and sent to opposite ends of the Mediterranean, never to see Rome or each other again. As Vipsania is led away by the court officials, you catch a final glimpse of her, a woman whose entire world has been dismantled in a single afternoon. Her story is a chilling example of the new Roman reality. Private moral failings now have public and devastating legal consequences. The system is working exactly as its architect intended. But that architect, the Emperor Augustus, is about to learn a terrible lesson: that a law, once written, is a rigid and unfeeling thing, and it does not care if the next person it ensnares is a stranger or your own child. The somber atmosphere of the basilica gives way to the gilded corridors of power on the Palatine Hill. We return to the place where this story began, the imperial residence. But the mood here is no longer one of calm, orderly prestige. There is a tension in the air, a sense of profound crisis emanating from the emperor's private chambers. You are a silent witness to the ultimate, most bitter irony of our story. The man who has made himself the moral arbiter of Rome, the architect of the unyielding Julian laws, is now facing a scandal within his own home that will test his laws and his heart in the most devastating way possible. The source of this crisis is his daughter, Julia. She is not just any noblewoman. She is Julia the Elder, Augustus's only biological child. From the moment of her birth, her life was not her own. She was a political asset, a precious broodmare for the new dynasty. She was educated, intelligent, and by all accounts, high-spirited and witty. Her father married her off 3 times in a series of strategic political alliances. First to his nephew Marcellus, then to his loyal right-hand man, the much older Marcus Agrippa, and finally to his stepson, Tiberius. With Agrippa, she did her dynastic duty, producing 5 children, including 2 boys, Gaius and Lucius Caesar, whom Augustus adopted as his own and designated as his heirs. But her final marriage to Tiberius was a disaster. It was a loveless, politically motivated union that made both of them miserable. Tiberius eventually fled Rome for self-imposed exile, leaving Julia in a state of quasi-widowhood. It is during this period that Julia, now in her 30s, allegedly embarks on a series of affairs that make the transgressions of our fictional Vipsania look like a mild indiscretion. The accusations, when they finally surface in 2 BC, are spectacular. The official charge sheet lists multiple lovers from some of the most prominent noble families in Rome. There are rumors of late-night drinking parties in the Roman Forum, of her cohort mocking her father's strict moral laws, and even of assignations on the rostra, the very speaker's platform from which her father's decrees were announced to the public. It was the ultimate act of filial defiance. When the evidence is brought to Augustus, his reaction is one of absolute fury and profound, personal agony. This is not a political rival he can coolly dispense with. This is his daughter, the mother of his beloved heirs. His first instinct is to handle it privately, to circumvent his own laws. He contemplates executing her, but his grief and paternal affection, the very emotions his laws disregard, stay his hand. For days, he locks himself in his rooms, refusing to speak to anyone. He is trapped in a cage of his own making. How can he, the great moral reformer, the man who has exiled hundreds of other citizens for the very same crime, possibly make an exception for his own daughter? To do so would expose his entire moral crusade as a sham, a political tool empty of genuine conviction. His enemies would pounce, accusing him of the one thing a Roman leader could never be, a hypocrite. He is forced to make a choice between his role as a father and his role as the embodiment of Roman law. In the end, The emperor wins. The law must be followed. Augustus composes a letter and sends it to the Senate, publicly outlining his daughter's alleged crimes in excruciating detail. Imagine the scene: a herald reading the emperor's words to a stunned chamber of senators, many of whose sons are implicated in the very same document. The private shame of the emperor's family is laid bare for the entire world to see. It is an act of brutal, self-inflicted political necessity. He doesn't put her on trial in the basilica, which would be an even greater spectacle. But his letter to the Senate serves the same function of public denunciation. The punishment is exactly what his law dictates. He annuls her marriage to Tiberius. He then exiles her. The destination he chooses for her is Pandateria, a tiny volcanic rock of an island less than 2 square miles in size, located off the coast of Campania. It is a bleak and lonely place, barren and windswept. Her mother, Scribonia, whom Augustus had divorced decades earlier to marry his great love Livia, volunteers to accompany her daughter into exile, a final act of maternal solidarity. The terms of Julia's exile are exceptionally harsh, even by the standards of his own law. No men are allowed on the island. She is forbidden from drinking wine, a direct and personal jab at her rumored parties. Anyone wishing to visit her must first secure the emperor's personal permission, and he must be provided with a full physical description of the visitor, their height, their complexion, the color of their eyes, and any identifying scars. He is consumed by a paranoid fear that she might find another lover even on her prison island. A strange and quirky legal tidbit is that he even has her personal villa on the mainland torn down, as if to erase any trace of her decadent life. The people of Rome, who had a soft spot for the charismatic Julia, actually protest the severity of the sentence, petitioning the emperor for her recall. But Augustus is implacable. According to the historian Suetonius, when the crowd begged for her return, he angrily replied that he wished they too might have such a daughter and such a wife. He never forgives her and will never see her again. Her lovers face the same legal consequences. They too are exiled, their properties confiscated. One of them, Iulus Antonius, the son of Augustus's great rival Mark Antony, is compelled to take his own life. The law becomes a political purge, conveniently removing a group of powerful young men from the city. The great irony of our story is cemented. Augustus, the father, is destroyed by his own success as Augustus, the lawgiver. Historians still argue how much of Julia's alleged behavior was true and how much was political slander cooked up by her enemies or even her stepmother, Livia, to clear the path for her own son, Tiberius. Was Julia a tragic victim of court intrigue, or was she a defiant free spirit who fatally underestimated her father's rigid principles? We can never truly know her motives. Julia will spend the rest of her life in exile, moved eventually to a slightly less harsh confinement on the mainland, but never freed. She will outlive her father, but just barely. Upon his death, his successor, Tiberius, her bitter ex-husband, cuts off her allowance, and she dies shortly after, a forgotten woman whose life was broken on the anvil of her own father's laws. And so, we leave this story. Let your mind drift away from the lonely island, from the cold halls of justice, from the silent, grief-stricken emperor. We see that in Rome, the consequences of cheating were not a simple matter of a broken heart. They were a complex storm of law, property, and politics, a storm that could, in the end, swallow even the daughter of the man who first unleashed it.